production. Mostly about production at Backflip Studios, which is the company that made Dragonvale, and fielding whatever questions you guys have whenever the heck you want. So.
Sweet.
Lit.
All right, so at Backflip Studios, I was hired as a 2D artist. So for them, that pretty much just means that I worked on Dragonvale in various capacities. They have a few other games at the studio, but my job was Dragonvale, and that was it. Mostly my job was designing and building dragons, but since I was a 2D artist, I also did some environment work and a very, very, very tiny bit of UI work, but they had like specific people for UI, so I didn't have to do that very often. For any game asset in Dragonvale, we had prompts that would come into the art department, and they were handed down by our design team. Our design team was it varied in size at times, but it was mostly 2 or so game designers that was headed up by our game director or product owner. So that's the guy who was in charge of everything on the game. His name was Mash. He was super great. But he had final say on anything that we put into the game, and if he didn't like it, it did not go into the game. So occasionally the art team would pitch ideas for dragon assets or environment assets, but the design team had the final say over that. So until it was approved by them, we actually didn't start working ever. Prompts that we would get for dragons varied a whole lot in depth. So sometimes we'd have a really in-depth idea, a paragraph worth of here's what we want to see for this dragon. Most of the time though, it was just a few words. So for example, I designed some dragons called the Aura Dragons, which here's sort of the first pass on those. And all I was really told for these was that we wanted to create a series of dragons that were inspired by emotions. And I was sort of free to experiment with what emotions we wanted to use and how we wanted to address that and come up with the color language that we were going to be using for these dragons. And so the ideation process for that was really, really open. As far as once you were given the prompt, you could kind of do whatever you wanted, which was something that I really liked because I kind of work weirdly. So a lot of my first stage art for dragons looks really, really different. So here's an example of one, and then here's a different one that just looks totally, totally different. Just because the whole point at this stage was to get every cool idea you had down and give it to the team for them to look at and sort of see what direction we wanted to go. Should I pause more?
No,
I don't want to talk about.
You're good.
I'm good? Okay.
Yeah.
So for this dragon this was the Hidden Bolt dragon, which was one of our summer event dragons. And all I was given was the words. They're Hidden Bolt. That's what it's going to be named. Have fun. So I took. This is the design that we ended up going with. Was number 3 right here. So the dragon normally looks like this, and then occasionally has lightning light up in its chest. But the whole idea of this page was to sort of get that idea across of lightning bolts that are sort of hidden within the dragon. And we did a lot of refinement after this. So usually we only had a couple of days to go from our idea stage to a final concept. So we needed to be super fast. These ideation pages took half a day at the longest. What?
Nothing.
Oh, I think someone just said something. You're good.
Okay, I was getting a little bit of feedback. I wasn't sure if somebody was trying to say something. Okay. So this page was a half day. This page was a half day. They needed to be really quick because usually it was 2 days, maybe 3 days to get through to a final concept. After we did the rough ideation, we would go through an iteration process with our art lead to refine the dragon until it was game ready. The length of time that took varied from dragon to dragon, but for me, that process commonly included testing out different body types, like you see here. Some have legs, some don't, some fly, some don't. Also testing out colors, and for me specifically, pushing the dragons to match the Dragonvale style, because that's not a style that I normally work in. So that ended up being a part of my process all the time. So for these guys, we took this one here, and we did an iteration stage here just to sort of give him a bit more detail, and then the final design was very, very shortly after that. So he only had 2 stages. But for some of the other dragons, that was not the case. So for Gaia, for example, who was one of our legendary dragons, there it is, there's the file. So for one of our legendary dragons, like these are like the big dragons in the game. I'm not sure how many of you have played Dragonvale, but it's, you collect dragons. There's like 300 some dragons and a couple really big, powerful dragons in your park. So we designed a new one of those, and Gaia took like several weeks just once she was designed, and prior to that, several months just in like figuring out her balance and like what we wanted her to do for the players. So this was an early version of that, and pretty much everyone in the studio took a stab at designing Gaia before we got underway with her. This was super early, and then these are a bit more refined, like once we decided we wanted her to be sitting on a nest, to be watching over these eggs. And then after that, we went through and I did like a huge color sheet where we sort of tried to figure out what route we wanted her to go that way. And then after you get a finalized concept, so this was the finalized concept for her with like a few last little notes. Once we did that, it was time to build the dragon. So at Backflip, whoever concepted the asset was then the person who built it to go in the game as well. For environments, that meant you created simplified colorless versions of the assets in Maya called a gray box, which I can show you what one looks like. It's not awesome, but so here's what our gray boxes looked like. This is the concept for that. So this is for environments. I was designing like a windsock design. It didn't actually get into the game, but that's. And then here, so then we do a Maya build, and then you paint over the Maya build. I didn't finish it, but that's sort of like what the environment process was like. We would test it out on a green background because that's what most of the island tops are colored as. So when you're doing the assets, you really want to make sure they look right in the game world as you're building them. So that's what it was for environment. And then for the dragons, that meant you turned them into vectorized puppets, which were made up of like usually about 12 pieces. And then you pass those off to the animation team. And here's an example of one of our puppets. It's got sort of like blown apart on the top. This one is 12 pieces. Once you made the puppets, we had to do like some housekeeping tasks. We made icons for the dragons, designed dragon eggs, saved out the dragon eggs as in-game assets. And then this was the most important part, was making an animation document, because then you passed that off to the animation team, and they needed to be able to like see how it was built and how it should move. So I used the puppet and gave them a few like sample poses to say, here's what you can do with it. And, you know, sort of good luck. But that is basically the entire process for the art team on Dragonvale. Sometimes we would have things pop up, like a puppet would be broken and we needed to modify it so that it worked better for animation, or the game director didn't like the way a dragon was turning out and he would request a change. All of those issues were sort of addressed as they came up, but in the game, since it's always live, we had to address them pretty quickly because we were expected not to miss other deadlines for whatever assignment we were actually working on at the time. So that's Dragonvale. That's pretty much how it was. What? No, I can't. Okay, sure. I only have a couple other like production things to talk about, but I don't know. Now might be a good time to take questions on Dragonvale. Do you guys have? I can just like link to the stream. It's not a big deal. Yeah, So with this project, Dragonvale had like, I want to say 25 or 30 people on the project, and about 10 of those were QA people. I would say like 6 were engineers. The art team was like 7 people, and then we had like these numbers aren't going to add up, but so we actually were all in the same building when I was working on this, so it made it really easy. So if the game director said, "Hey, this is terrible. It looks bad. Your dragon looks like a vagina or something," which happened shockingly a lot. Then our art lead would talk to him, and then the art lead would bring that information to us, and then we'd sort of work around it. But if we needed to, we could just go talk to him and try to work it out. The only team that wasn't in our building was the animation team, because our animation team worked on all of the games at Backflip Studios. And like, I tried to talk to the animation team a lot, but not everybody did. So, but it made for a lot better dragons if you were in communication with them, because they could tell you what would move best for them, since they were building like rigs with the puppets that we gave them in Maya.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the movement of the dragons.
Hmm.
It seems like you guys are the ones ideating and finalizing the dragon concepts. I mean, to what extent, I mean, would you, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to ask is how many poses can you get a certain design to do? I mean, I see that you gave them some possible outcomes with this Hades dragon that you have.
Hmm.
But you know, what was that something you always try to think about before you hand it off to the animation?
Um, Yeah, and I mean, like, it works a lot better if you do think about that. So we did have some fairly standard versions of dragons. So there was like a way to build them. Let me see if I can find one of my files here.
Yeah, you mean like a template that you guys followed?
More or less, but that only worked if the dragon had like 4 legs and like a neck and a tail and a midsection, which they don't always, and don't often. Um, but essentially, we would. Here, I will just show you. So essentially, a dragon would be like this. Like, this is a really shitty dragon, but
I like it.
thanks. So our pieces would then so the dragon would look roughly like that. Our pieces would so breaking down to 12 pieces from this one was pretty easy because it's like a fairly standard design. You'd have a head, a jaw, and then a neck piece here, and then you'd have a circle here and here that had pivots in the middle, and you'd build the pieces so that they could move around those like up and down. It was sort of like if you ever played with those pin puppets as a kid, they were like that. So then you'd have central body piece, each leg is a piece,
Yeah.
2 wings, and a tail, usually with a pivot there. So you wanted them to be able to move as much as possible because we could think about what we wanted animation to do, but animation a lot of times would come up with totally different stuff or want to do things that we didn't necessarily consider when we were designing the dragon. So the best thing that you could do, like when building the puppets, was to move them around and see how they were working to make sure that you could get as much range of motion as possible. And that was easier with some dragons than others.
Right.
Did you ever get to see how the animation team was animating with the puppets? So it might have given you a better idea or something?
Hmm. Yeah, actually, so this is a test that I did for the animation team, just to see if the pieces I was giving them were going to work. But yeah, so a lot of times I would pop in and talk with them and see what was working and what wasn't. And just because the process was pretty fast, it made it kind of difficult. Like if the dragon wasn't broken, we didn't usually change stuff for it, but we did take it into consideration for later dragons. Um, but yeah, so you could kind of talk. I talked to them constantly, especially on so certain dragons were weird designs, and the weirder the design was, the more like you needed to be in touch with the animation team, or it wasn't going to work. Um, So for like this dragon, this is the ribbon dragon. This is like nothing we've ever done before. So for this one, I was in communication with our animation girl and also her lead the whole time, just to try and make sure that it worked for them. And it still ended up being like really weird, but it works. It worked a lot better. Like we stayed in communication like a lot. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, then like the weirder the dragon, the more in depth I wanted to get on the documentation, so that if they had any questions, they could just refer to the documentation, and it wouldn't slow them down any.
We have a question from the chat for you. Someone
Okay.
wants to know what the work environment is like concerning, I guess, either at your studio or whether you're working remotely or just in general overall. You kind of talked about the process, but basically, I guess you could talk about, do you like it or was it a good experience, or give us a little insight on that maybe.
Sure. So I did both. I contracted with the studio at first, and they did sort of like an art test period, but it was also I was contracting with them, and that period was not awesome. I mean, it was contracting. So when you're doing that, you have a very long distance relationship, and it depends a lot on whether you can get in touch with people easily. The whole process is a lot slower from long distance. So once I got in house, it was actually a lot better. It was a job. So any job, like there's good days and bad days, but the team was really great. It was full of awesome people who were really passionate about what they do, which was super nice. And yeah, I mean, sometimes like your boss would have a bad day, and so everybody was sort of in a funk. But a lot of times people were just excited about what they were doing and trying to do their best. So that was pretty cool. To be working on a game that has been around for 5 years was really, really neat. Especially like in mobile, that's forever. 5 years is a really long time. And so, you had these people who had been on the game the whole time and like really cared about what it was and how well we did. So.
I got a question. I'm the guy behind the computer.
Man
So
behind the
you guys make animation documents for the animators to understand it, but is there an overall character design document to understand shape language, or at this point, because it's been around for so long and there's so many dragons, do you just reference other dragons that have existed?
That's a hard question. So we had a style guide.
Okay.
The style guide sort of talked about like there were a lot of like little things that make the dragons look like Dragonvale dragons. So for example, like on this guy, the horns are always set into the head. Like the feathers need to look like actual feathers with shape and form to them, and like just there was a design document about that. But because there are so many dragons, with like 300 dragons on in the game and more continuing to be made all the time, we were sort of like given free reign to kind of not break the style, but break what a dragon can be. So for example, like this dragon is weird. It does not look like all of the other Dragonvale dragons, but that's just because, at some point you want new and exciting things for people to enjoy. He's still got the Dragonvale style, like the cell shading sort of stuff going on, and like the very thick spines, but we were given a bit more free reign to attempt weird stuff if we wanted to, just because you don't want everything to look same old, same old. And like this was another dragon that was sort of a weird one. I mean, he doesn't have legs, he doesn't have wings, he's a big ball of knots. But people got pretty excited about making new looking dragons so long as they still fit the Dragonvale style.
Have there ever been dragons released that were not well received, and then you had to revisit them? That's
hit a nerve.
Yeah, that's what I want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, there were dragons released that were not well received. There sort of always are. That's kind of like that's kind of a common thread. Like, you can't please everyone. It's something that you learn pretty quick doing production. So, no matter how hard you try and like how much effort you put into a dragon, not everybody's gonna like it. We have had dragons that people just hated.
What kind of hate mail do you get from Dragon? Like, what kind of? How do you find
um,
out that they hate it? Like, what kind of like forums and subculture is there?
Let me see. I've actually saved a few of our
Yes.
commentary from fans because it was funny to me. I was actually reading that the other day. Here's one that I really liked because these were dragons that I worked on. This woman writes to say, "Hey Dragonvale, any chance you could do a Hanukkah or a Kwanzaa dragon this coming holiday season? Hanukkah and Kwanzaa are starting the same day this year, and judging by last year, it appears you're running out of ideas." Yeah, and I designed the Christmas dragons for the year before that, or sorry, winter holiday dragons the year before that. So that was a really fun comment to receive. But yeah, so I mean, some dragons people love, some dragons people hate, and like a lot of our fans have different opinions on what makes a good dragon. Some of our fans like really creepy dragons. Some of them like really cute. Some of them like awkward, and so a lot of times someone may really like it, somebody else is just like, it's not my favorite. We have had a few dragons that have gotten a lot of hate though, but usually because the game is constantly live, we don't have time to go back and change that. Like a dragon comes out, that's just what it looks like.
Are we gonna get a Hanukkah dragon?
I do not know.
Oh, be inclusive.
I don't know. I actually left the studio not that long ago to pursue freelance, so I don't know. And I couldn't tell you even if I did because I am under NDA.
Right. I know that feel. Can you tell us about how you've been like any freelance advice you have? Because I know quite a few of us have done some freelance work or are looking into doing more freelance work.
For freelance, make the work that you want to be contracted to do. Like if you want to do comics, make comic pages. If you want to do character design, do that. If you want to do Hearthstone cards, freaking practice painting Hearthstone cards. Because like companies are gonna come to you when they see that you're already doing what they want you to do. So sort of suit your work to whatever it is that you feel like doing. Yeah, that's the best advice that I have. And then shop around to people, like especially if your work's a little unknown, like try to post a lot, and then just go to the people that you want to be working with and say, hey, I'm a freelance artist. Here's my work. Do you have anything? So
shove it in their face.
Kind of, but like politely.
Going back to Dragonvale really quick, or I guess general subject of Dragonvale. So you talked about how there was some pretty just like loose words given to you sometimes, potentially not a lot of direction. How do you feel about that? Because I know that can be super liberating for some people, and then other people that can be totally crippling because they just don't really, like some people work better with being told exact things to do, and then other people, if they're given those really intense limits, they have a hard time working within them. How did you feel about those, and like what were some strategies you used to work with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really liked it because I've always sort of enjoyed the problem-solving aspect of it, but I was one of 2 dragon artists on the team, and the other dragon artist had been doing it sort of like longer than I had. So sometimes she would get something and she'd be like, I don't know, they only gave me 1 word. I'm not sure what to do with this. And so then we would brainstorm a bit more. But for me, I thought it was fun. There were a few times where I had some trouble with it, but mostly like in order to address having trouble with it, I would just usually go and get reference. So these are some Christmas ornamental dragons that I designed. And like this over here is just all like I started off and I'm like ornamental but medieval, I don't know. So I just sort of went to the internet and just found a ton of pictures and sort of came up with an idea for what I felt like I wanted to try and do with it. And that was really the best way for me, like sort of exploring things that I think are cool or pretty or whatever, and somewhat related to the word that I was given, helped me a lot.
Really awesome.
Yeah, those are really cool.
Your style guides are excellent. How do you do the palettes? Now I know that does Dragonvale have very specific palettes that they work with, or was it pretty much just come up with the color you want to come up with?
So for the palettes, so this set of dragons is a little different because I designed all of the dragons in the series. So we have a few dragon types where So like these were ornamental dragons. That was their type, and they all go together. So for the colors, I just kind of wanted to fit them together. So for this one, I was focusing on very like wintry feeling colors, and I sort of took what I collected for the reference up here, brought it down here, and just tried out like, okay, I think this will look nice. I also designed the habitat for these guys, so for them, they needed to look good on the habitat, which is another thing that like we always had to pay attention to, because each dragon goes in a specific habitat. So like here's the habitat that these guys go in. And I designed that habitat as well, but we wanted them to like fit with the habitat, but still, stand out, and just sort of like look nice on what they were on top of. As for like color, like specific colors, so there are primary dragons that have been in the game forever. If you're designing a dragon that was sort of a combination of that, it was helpful to stay near those original colors, but you didn't have to.
Cool.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I started to look for another image mid-sentence. So, like, here's another ugly color sheet that I did for a Halloween dragon. But like, I was just sort of really, really fast because we were already behind schedule on this guy. And yeah, so we just tried out a bunch of stuff usually.
Big old mouth.
Yeah, he was fun to do. He was sort of like looks sweet half the time, and then has like a whole bunch of like secret pieces that make him look like a monster. That was the trick dragon.
Oh, very cool.
Hey Olivia, it's Dylan. I've been messaging with you this like back and forth, but when you were talking about like all the different events in Dragonvale, like how you said for like the like winter event that what?
Don't worry about it.
Okay, I don't know, man. You said for the winter event that like you knew about it like a year in advance. Did you know about all events about a year in advance or?
Usually it was like we know events are going to be happening every year around the same time of year. So our biggest events in Dragonvale were the summer event, which is usually a huge fair that we create like 10 or 15 dragons for every year. And then the winter event, which is also coincides with some other small like mini event in the game, which is called the Bring 'em Back, where you can breed any dragon available at any time. So those were our big events, and usually with those we knew they were coming like a year ahead, but we started working on them like 4 months or 6 months ahead because they took a really long time to do. And that's just sort of a consistent thing like across the board. Like the events were crunch time for us, and I mean, I say crunch, but our production team was actually really, really good and really proud of themselves that we never ever had to like stay extra hours at the studio, because our production guys were really good at scheduling everybody, and that was actually a point of pride for them.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question about the environments. I haven't actually played Dragonvale. Does the environment?
Dare you?
Don't get sassy with me.
Oh, that's fine. I hadn't played it till I started working there, so I can't judge you.
Do the environments animate?
Some of them do, yes. Not all of them.
How do you animate them? Because I saw the windsock, and do you animate them as the 3D model, or do you paint it and then animate it as the painting, like the 2D asset?
Yeah, you animate it as the painting. So with this one, what we would have ended up doing is taking it and making it so it would be painted, and then you'd take it and make it into several pieces, which is also what we did for any that needed dimensionality to it. So you would just take and make all of these like a front piece all together, and then you would have each of the windsocks be its own thing with like a pivot there and probably a pivot there, so that they could sort of get some up and down motion. But yeah, so they were animated pretty similarly to how the dragons were animated. We didn't really do it in 3D. It was all like 2D.
And so these when they were painted like in 3D, or were they rendered out as the 2D gray image and then just painted on top of that?
That second one. So yeah, cool. We always rendered out the gray image, and then did the painting on the top.
surprised how much
It
of
ended
this
up
is
it ended
2D.
up being the fastest. What?
I'm surprised like how much of this is like done 2D.
Yeah, Dragonvale is mostly 2D game.
It's
Just
animated in Maya though, isn't it?
huh?
It's animated in Maya though, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So we would take the vector puppets, hand those off to the animation team, who would sort of rig them, but they didn't really need extensive rigging. So our dragons mostly don't have controllers or anything. Yeah, they were pretty simple. Since the game was made so long ago, the studio was only like, I want to say 20 people when the game first released. So we were working on a lot of like old technology and sort of like updating it to make it still usable and still, valid in a modern mobile setting. But a lot of it was, yeah, bare bones, easy to do, but there was a lot of figuring out how to make that the most efficient way that we could.
We have another question from the chat. Someone wants to know how you were hired by Backflip, since they're kind of a smaller company, and who did you get in contact with, or did they get in contact with you? Basically, like, what's the story behind getting the job?
Well, I was hired at Backflip. I opened Game Dev Map, which I don't know. Do you guys know Game Dev Map?
Some of us do, yeah.
Yeah. So Game Dev Map is a site that just shows you all of the game studios in the United States. Here's what it looks like, and in the world. So you can just sort of like go around. I just picked where I wanted to live and sent a bunch of applications to the companies that were there. So I sent an application to Backflip, and they got in touch with me like a month later. I talked to a guy who actually doesn't work there anymore, but was the art director at the time, named Ryan Drag, and they did a couple art tests with me. They had me come in and meet the team and do an interview, and then they hired me. They also did a lot of contracting at the time, so I know that they had like a few people who were in-house contractors and a few people who were long-distance contractors as well.
Were you an in-house contractor or long distance?
I was a long-distance contractor, and then part of my hiring was that they covered relocation.
I don't know if you mentioned this before. Did you work anywhere else before working at Backflip? Like, were you doing like what was your life out of graduation?
A lot of freelance and sadness. But it was partially because I applied to a few big studios, didn't get in, and didn't really apply too many other places. I just sort of kept working on what I was doing instead of applying around. But Backflip was my first like real job, so there was a lot of like learning for me. But it was a good place to get my start. It was a decent studio.
So what kind of freelance stuff do you do now?
Right now, I'm doing mostly sequential, mostly comics. That's actually the other thing I was going to talk about, production
Whoa.
for freelance comics. So that's like a great segue.
I have a question.
But if you guys have any more questions, I'll take those first.
All right. I got another question.
Okay.
What would you say are some of your favorite designs that you've submitted to be animated for? And did they actually get end up in the game, or?
So on Dragonvale, pretty much there are a lot of like early stage designs that didn't make it in the game necessarily, but every dragon I worked on pretty much is in the game now. You get a dragon, you make it, and it goes in the game. They really don't throw much away there. They just make it work. My favorite dragon though was Gaia. She was really awesome. She was super fun to do. Her puppet was ridiculous. It had like 30 pieces. Her neck flips back and forth, which is like 180 degrees. It's never anything we've ever done. She was a lot of fun. And then I think other than that, I really liked this guy. He was our 5th anniversary dragon, so we wanted one that did something really weird. And his head pops in and out of those little holes in his body.
Awesome.
Yeah, and he rolls around and bounces, and his head pops in and out of the holes.
Do you
It's
have
pretty
any
cool.
video of like what he looks like in the game? game?
I could probably find one.
Oh,
We have one fan who posts a video of every dragon.
That's awesome.
So
stuff
that's
seems to
pretty
happen a lot.
fun. Let me see if I can find a video.
That's me.
I was also wondering how that one animated too.
Actually, I have a question while you're finding that video. So I know a lot of apps or a lot of online games or just games in general, they'll like have fan wikis that are made and like all kinds of, like you were saying, YouTube videos that are compilations. Do you know of any potential like Dragonvale wikis? And then also, as part of the company, how much do you guys watch those? Like, is that something that it's just kind of cool that fans make? Is it something that you like the company potentially doesn't like, or is it something that you might even be actively a part of? Like, do you know at all?
Yeah. So we have a major wiki. It's just the Dragonvale wiki. It's kept up by a group of our fans that we consider super fans at the studio.
Right.
They are awesome. We're not in super close contact with them, but I know our game director was in contact with them from time to time, and he would like occasionally feed them like surprise information that they could put out to the public then, and sort of generate some hype for people about the game. The wiki is actually pretty well run. Like the people running it are great at what they do. But yeah, it's mostly them. Like we don't come to them and say, hey, you can't say this about our game or whatever, because it's their fan thing. But it is pretty good. I checked it all the time. I'm not sure how many of like my coworkers did. I liked to look and see what people were saying about the different dragons and stuff though, so I checked it a lot.
Right. It's basically free advertising, so I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know why you wouldn't like it, but
Has
that's
there
really
been
cool.
some companies or something like that
There's
haven't
some-
liked it?
Yeah, well, there's some people who don't like, fan bases.
Oh, I do
doing
know
certain
there are
things.
quite a few companies that do strategic leaks
Yeah.
through their fan wikis.
Right.
Right, and I mean we have a few fans that are very, very involved with the community, and we actually did an event called the Fanfare event last year where we had our fans make a video of why they should come to the studio and meet us and see the whole process and everything. And we had 8 fans that we brought into the studio and like showed around, and they helped design a dragon, which was really. They loved it. They did voice acting at the studio, like they did dragon voice acting, and that was just like a really good way to communicate with the people who love our game and who are really, really involved with it. And then some of those fans have sort of gone on to be representatives for the company to the other fans of the game.
That's awesome.
Dragonvale is
Yeah.
so wholesome.
You treat your fans
Yeah, I mean that's yeah.
All these wholesome
Here's
family
I found the video of the wormwood. Here's the baby.
Why is that dragon so cute?
That's the baby, and let's see if I can go just find the adult.
Oh, does it go through all the stats
Yes.
too?
Yeah, you
Amazing.
feed it and it grows up. So I think here's where about so you start feeding it,
Oh,
and then it grows into a juvenile. That's what the juvenile looks like. The juveniles are always a little wonky because we never like designed those specifically. They're sort of just so that's the adult in the habitat behind Trick right there. But that's the adult. He sort of rolls around and pokes his head in and out. And actually, this one's my other favorite, the Trick Dragon right here. He looks a lot cooler in motion than still. But he just sort of like sits around and then does this little freak out thing where he blows fire everywhere. But this guy pulls all of his body parts in and just rolls. There's a race in the game where you put the dragons in and they sort of race against each other. And his roll animation is just that.
do you know about that Oriental dragon that's in the upper left of that video? The Chinese dragon.
The rainbow dragon?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of our first dragons. Actually, the rainbow dragon is a big part of what helped this game get off the ground. So at the very beginning, we had a bunch of primary dragons, and that was the whole point of the game, to collect the primary dragons, breed them together, and get combinations of that. The rainbow dragon was like a special secret dragon that you could get if you happened to hit the right combination and the right amount of luck. And that dragon, people like went crazy for it, and they were like, yeah, I'm going to try and get this and spend like a month trying to get this dragon. And so that actually gave a lot of excitement to what would otherwise have been just like sort of a straightforward collection game.
my little sister has a wipe off board above her bed that's like just gigantic. She had like
Mhm.
all the dragons listed in like different combination, like, and then she'd cross it out if it didn't get it. And like until she came out, she's like, Peyton, I breeded the rainbow dragon. I did it, and it was like we like threw a freaking party for her. Like it was the biggest deal.
Right.
And then a month later, it was like the strings and connected
1 month,
pictures.
1 month, her Dragonvale logged her out, and she cried. She
Oh.
cried so much, and then she logged back in, like, and all her dragons were still there. She thought they died.
Yeah, fortunately our CS team is pretty cool. Like that, so there's occasional issues with people getting logged out or losing their parks, but our customer service team's really good. They're usually really great about getting people's parks back. But there is an app for that. Like she doesn't have to write down all the combinations. There's an app now that's all about just the best combination to get any given dragon in the game.
Did you guys
But
make
that's another fan-made thing. Like we didn't make that in the studio.
Does it make you mad when like fans like make cheat codes or stuff?
We haven't had two. I know there's some fans that have like an instant gem cheat code. It doesn't I don't deal with that on a daily basis. So I know it pissed off our designers though, and so they would try to like figure out how to work around that. But mostly our fans are pretty cool, and they actually wanted like the challenge of trying to get everything in the game for themselves. So that's part of the fun. I mean, that's the whole gameplay is collecting everything. So it's more fun if you don't cheat. When I was playing the game at the studio, I know you could go to one of the designers and say, hey, give me gems, but I actually never did that because I wanted to see how hard it was for our players. It's more fun that way. Here's an animation of the other dragon that is my favorite. That's Gaia. So you had to go through like all these quests to summon her. Oh my god, this video is shitty. So that's what she looks like. And she sort of goes down and like nudges the eggs and flips her wings around. She's
my God.
So that's Gaia. She took a really long time. She was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed making that dragon. She had some fun particle effects. Oh yeah, I forgot that. We actually had a person on our team he was normally an environment designer, but he also did all the particle effects for the different breath weapons. So each dragon in the game has a different breath weapon. That's what hers looks like. I say weapon, but like they don't fight. So they all had like different breath effects, and that was his job. Part of his job, he would put in the different breath.
What software do you guys use?
I was just about to, Are we allowed to know what kind of engine or software you guys use to build this?
I can tell you, but I don't know if it'll mean much. It's an in-house engine that was developed for this game 5 years ago.
Cool.
It's called the Phobic engine. It's, as far as I know, not used in anything else. But the software for making it just varied depending on the person. So I used Photoshop almost exclusively. Maya was one that was used in-house a lot just for making the assets. And then for the breath, we used something called Pyro. It was an okay program. I mean, it did what we wanted.
Well, do you want to transition into your comics discussion?
Sure, yeah. That won't take super long either, but actually this is I was going to show real quick. This is the dragon that we got to design with the fans. This is the fanfare dragon, the Portent is what it was called.
What's he sound
It was really fun.
Well,
And actually this is a piece breakdown.
can you give us his sound? What does he sound like?
I actually don't know. We have one sound engineer at the office, and like so when you click on the dragons in game, they make a noise. And actually, when I interviewed the guy that I interviewed with, one of the people I interviewed with, we spent a half hour in his office with him showing me different dragons and making dragon noises, and that was like a really fun experience. And I was like 5 minutes late to my next interview because of that. But so one guy makes pretty much all the sound for the game. He's really good.
Making dragon noises?
Dragon noises, all the music, all of the like effects from the buttons, everything.
voice a dragon?
No, but I did voice a character in another game that we did.
Nice.
Yeah, the studio was small enough that they would do occasionally like a call for, hey, we're doing voice acting for one of our other games, and you could go in and do a session. It was really fun. I actually loved it. But okay. As for working for comics, this is kind of fun stuff. So I've done 2 comics. They were both annuals. They were both a lot of fun. The first company I worked with was a company called Boom Studios. I don't know if any of you are familiar. They do the Adventure Time comics. They do I think some Power Rangers comics. They just do like a lot of indie comics. They're creator-owned comic company, kind of small, but really, really great to work with. And I was contracted by them to do pencils and inks for an annual short story for the comic Goldie Vance, which is about like a girl detective in sort of a 50s setting. For them, I was given samples of the comic's art style, and they gave me like very specific environment locations. They showed me, they're like, here's where this is going to be set. Try and make it look like this. And then character art of what the characters should look like. But when I was given the script, I was completely free to arrange layouts and panels however I wanted. Like that was really, really nice. It was super freeing. The deadline was actually pretty long too, so that was also awesome. The process I went through, I essentially just made a rough layout for them. So they gave me this file, not that. Where are the roughs? Yeah, there we go. So they gave me this file with an active zone. The bleed is right here, and then over here, which you don't want to put anything in because it's going to get cropped out. And then I just would give them a layout and say, here's what I'm looking at doing for this page, send it off. They would say, that looks good, or maybe change this around a little bit. And then I went through and I did the inks, which that's what they look like. I like to put my frames on a different layer. So, and that was pretty much it. And then after that, I would send the inks off and somebody else colored them. The other comic company that I worked for, I got to do a comic for Marvel, which is super, super fun. Compared to Boom, Marvel had a really, really, really tight turnaround time. Like, I did 6 pages of a comic for them, and the turnaround was like 8 days. I was also hired to do pencils and inks, and it was a short story in their first annual Spider-Gwen comic. They gave me a script immediately. The script was really, really specific. It had like pages numbered, and then under each page, speech bubbles and stage directions were all numbered to tell you what panel they belonged in. But other than following the script, the process was really, really unrestricted. I was told that like canonical environment design wasn't something that they cared about or that they were concerned about really. I got to design a character for this comic because it was one that hadn't appeared in this world yet. I got to design a character, I got to design location, which takes longer, but was cool. The process was basically the same as with Boom Studios as well. I made a rough layout, and then I sent the rough layout for approval. And once the layout was approved, we did the inks, and here's the inks for that page. So layout, inks. And then after the inking phase, I made like a few modifications. Like this frame, we had to do a little bit of stuff, a few changes to, as you can see, like even from the thumbnail, it doesn't look exactly like what it ended up becoming. And so we had to get those changes turned around really, really quickly because it still had to be colored. So after the inks were done for Marvel, I put the images up on their private server, and then they were handed off to the colorist. And once the pages went to the colorist, I basically had no more contact with the company. I mean, I asked for like a performance review, and that was about it. And it was really, really stressful, but it was a really exciting project, and I would love to do it again. And really, with this one, the only surprise from Marvel was that after I finally received the copy of the comic, they had changed some of the words from the script, which was a little weird because I used those words to do like the acting for the character. Like this character's super melodramatic, and I used the script to do the acting, but some of the words changed at the end, which I didn't know what to expect, but that was like the only surprise at the end of the day, and that was what working for Marvel was like. I would love to do some more stuff for them. It was pretty cool.
How many pages did you do for them?
For Marvel, I did 6.
Okay. And they just contracted you based on like pages that they wanted you to do?
It was based on the story. So I did a story called "Who Watches the Watchers." It was a 6-page long short story written by their usual writer.
Okay, cool. So the whole thing. Any questions on the comics?
I know sometimes when you have somebody in comics who's doing like mainly just like the line art and stuff, and then a different person who's writing it. Did you have any communication with the writer during your time illustrating, or was it mainly just following the script?
So it varied from job to job. With Marvel, I did not have communication with the writer at all. I had a liaison who I went through, and he sort of took care of everything for me. I was told from the very beginning that like if I wanted to change panels a little bit, I was allowed to if I thought I could sell it better. So on this page, there were only supposed to be there were only supposed to be 5 panels. I added the 6th one, but because I thought it would sell his reaction a little better, and they were fine with that because it was just a minor tweak. But yeah, mostly I just had to follow the script that I was given. At Boom Studios, I was in contact with the writer, but I still didn't get to change the script. Like I could talk to the writer if I wanted about like ideas she had for certain areas as written, but still no script changes. You still sort of just followed what you were given.
Alright, well, yeah, if there's no more questions, I guess we're pretty much, I mean, we've already sucked up quite a bit of your time, so
That's
we
fine.
really appreciate it. If there's
I
more
actually
things-
I have like a set of tips at the very end if you guys want to hear those,
yes,
and then like
okay,
that's.
Well, actually, no.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
Of
fine.
course,
It's fine. But yeah, so I actually wrote down a few tips that are like the biggest things I took away from like working at Backflip Studios and working on comics as well. And I guess here they are. So my very first tip that I learned working at Backflip is don't leave sloppy files. Working in a big studio or even a medium-sized studio like that, other people are probably going to have to work on the files when you're done with them, and it wastes a lot of time to leave a really, really messy file. When I was on Dragonvale, we actually went back and updated a lot of the dragons because the game was 5 years old. So a lot of the older dragons didn't look that great, or the animation was broken, or the puppets were not built the best. So we went back and updated them. And I cannot even tell you how many dragons I had to just throw away the original files and start over because it would have taken 10 times longer just to parse those files instead of starting from scratch. And like that's not good. You never want that. And like when I say keep a clean file, working lossless is fine. You can save iterations in there, but like using folders and naming your shit is super important. So like on Dragonvale, a lot of the layers didn't have names. So there'd be a shape layer here with no name. There'd be a shading layer with no name, and it wouldn't even be next to the layer that it was shading. And so it just became a big mess to try and sort through. So like with comics, that equates to I like to put my frame layer on the top. I like to sort my inks together, and then like roughs are all together. It's a really, really good habit to be in because you never know who else is going to have to work on the file after you. My second, and actually, like for me, this is like a good rule of thumb that I use. If I can't open the file and find where I put something, it needs to be reorganized. My second rule, like the tip that I learned was be efficient. Being fast is really good, but your work still needs to meet a professional standard. If you're fast and it looks really bad, that's a problem. If it looks really great, but you pass the deadline by a month, that's a problem. Like it's super important to figure out where you can afford to speed things up and where you really need to spend the time on detail. Which brings me to meeting deadlines. Try really hard to meet deadlines. Don't ever let it be your fault that a delivery date wasn't met. So especially in the concept department and especially at Backflip, if you slowed the process down in concept, everyone down the line had to deal with that. For Marvel specifically, that meant that the longer I took on pencils and inks, the less time my colorist had to do his job. And the guy that I was paired with for coloring was really, like, he was pro. He did a really good job and he still got it done. But compared to his usual quality of work, you could tell that it was a rush job. Like, you could just tell because I had taken too much time on my end. And at Backflip, any art that you had to do any art job down the pipeline had somebody waiting on the other end of it. Dragon designers passed their work off to the animation team, who handed off to engineers for implementation, and then it was given to testers. And so, like, if there's a hiccup anywhere in there, you don't want it to be you. And then the very last thing I have as a tip is have passion for your work, but be ready to let it go. This was and is and I think probably always will be the hardest lesson for me to learn in a professional setting. Because like the passion you have in your project will reflect in your work. And for me, that was super exciting part of making art. I enjoyed finding solutions to problems in my own way and trying my hardest to make sure that what I came up with was the best solution for the project, for the client, and for me. But at the end of the day, when the client or the boss tells you to change something, they get to do that because it's their project. They're the ones who own it, and like in some instances you can discuss it with the client or the boss and tell them why you did something a certain way. That's not always an option, and it really depends on your relationship with them. But once you've made your case, that's really all you can do. And if the boss says change it, you do it. And like that for me, that was like the most important thing that I think I picked up at Backflip. That you just do it. Like no matter how much you care about it, at the end of the day, it's somebody else's to make the decision on. But that's production art.
Well, awesome. Thank you very much, Olivia. This was excellent. Thanks for talking so long and giving us wonderful tips on everything. Yeah. Oh, Jeff says hi.
Oh yeah.
By the way.
Eric says hi too.
Yeah. So
I
everyone
saw
says
Eric.
hi.
Eric said hi in Skype.
Yeah, but I mean, if you don't have anything else and there's no more questions, then I guess we're wrapping it up. And thank you very much.
Yeah. Cool.
Are we doing anything? All right. I guess with that, thank you so much, Olivia.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.